deadly week. More than 21 killed in anti-government protests in Iran, which enter their sixth day. We have the latest, including reaction from the White House. The president and Catholics. We discuss the White House 2018 agenda and how it might affect the faithful. New Year's delivery. Pope Francis gives his first message of 2018. We tell you what he says and to whom it's directed. And honoring our mother. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley takes us through the images of St. Peter's dedicated to the Mother of God. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 2nd, 2018. Good evening and Happy New Year from Washington. Thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says people in Iran are hungry for food and freedom. He supports protesters who for 6 days have criticized Iran's government. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jason. The president returns from his Christmas break in Florida, and he's jumping right into international affairs. The White House says Iranians deserve the right to express themselves peacefully. Still, hundreds of protesters have been arrested, and some could even face the death penalty. 21 deaths reported in the public clashes between protesters and Iranian security forces. It started almost a week ago as food prices in Iran jumped as much as 40%. Now President Trump is raising his voice, tweeting, "The people of Iran are finally acting against the brutal and corrupt Iranian regime. All of the money that President Obama so foolishly gave them went into terrorism and into their pockets. The people have little food, big inflation, and no human rights. The U.S. is watching." The White House press secretary says the Iranian people deserve to be heard.
The Iranian people are angry at the rising tide of corruption in their daily lives. The people are tired of paying the price for their violent and corrupt rulers.
Demonstrations began last Thursday and spread across the country. Iran's 2015 nuclear deal that lifted international sanctions was supposed to help Iran's economy, but the people reportedly aren't seeing the results. Some of the protesters have now been threatened with the death penalty.
And so what you see today is a smoldering ash catching fire.
Majid Sajpour works in Washington, D.C., advocating for the rights of the Iranian people.
So the international community, all it needs to do is stand by its moral principles. What's right is standing for human rights, for women's rights, for religious rights. Those fundamental beliefs is at the core of this country.
Iran's president pushes back, saying President Trump is no friend to his people. He blames Trump for constantly creating problems for Iranians, including when they try to obtain U.S. visas, referring to President Trump's travel ban. Jason?
Mark, besides the tweets and speaking out, what else is the United States doing to support the protesters?
The Trump administration has called for the United Nations Security Council and Human Rights Council to hold emergency meetings on Iran. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says nowhere is the urgency of peace, security, and freedom being tested more than in Iran. Jason.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark Irons at the White House tonight. More changes in the Senate. The longest-serving Republican announces he's retiring.
I may be leaving the Senate, but the next chapter in my public service is just beginning.
Utah Senator Orrin Hatch announces today in a video that he will not seek re-election. The 83-year-old has held the seat for more than 40 years. He says one of his proudest achievements is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which guarantees religious liberty protections. And House and Senate leaders from both parties, along with White House officials, meet tomorrow on Capitol Hill. They'll be talking about government funding. Congress needs to pass a budget by January 19th deadline, also part of the 2018 agenda, protecting dreamers who came to this country illegally as children. The GOP will hold a slim 51 to 49 majority in the Senate. And to discuss immigration, we're joined now by Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles and former chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So can the White House, can Congress come up with a deal for these dreamers?
I think so. I think we have a real possibility of passing legislation that provides relief to those who benefited from DACA And ironically, it's because of President Trump. President Trump has called on Congress to codify DACA before the program expires in March. And Republican leaders in both House and Senate have said that they want to do so. The question is, will Democrats play ball? Will they negotiate with Republican leadership? Because what Republicans are saying is they want to do this as part of a larger immigration bill that includes border security, including funding for fencing, and ending chain migration by doing away with immigrant visas for extended family. Democrats have supported those two measures in the past. So the question is, are they going to play politics, or are they actually going to sit down at the negotiating table and try to find some consensus? I think we're near.
And DACA refers to the Deferred Action for Child Arrivals. That's President Obama's executive order.
The executive order that Obama passed, very controversial, which gave an employment authorization document for those who benefited. They could actually work, and it shielded them from deportation, and it's set to expire in March.
One of the sticking points that you mentioned, though, about the Democrats coming to the table with the Republicans is going to be the issue of the wall, right? You see Republicans, see President Trump saying they need to have funding for the wall. Will Democrats be able to support that? I mean, right now it seems like they might.
But they have in the past, and what's being talked about, it's not building a 2,000-mile wall along the southern border. It's additional funding, I don't know, $2 billion for strategic funding along the southern border. Democrats have supported that in the past. So publicly, they're playing politics with the issue. To be fair, the president as well, when he talks about his big wall. But what we're talking about is additional money for strategic fencing. That should not be an issue. The same thing with chain migration. For years, perhaps even decades, Democrats and Republicans have been talking about doing away with immigrant visas for extended family, for brothers, sisters, children who are over 18 and married, and also doing away with the lottery visa. So I think those things can be done, and that would include a bill that potentially could provide a path to citizenship for dreamers. I think that's great. I think both parties have to be flexible, but they have to put the country first.
And immigration reform hasn't been done in the past, so if it's done now, that would be really historic.
And I think Democrats understand that ironically, it would be under this president, who's been much maligned as being anti-immigration or anti-Hispanic, that he would get something like this done. But I think actions speak louder than words.
Really quick, if you could, in 10 seconds, what's chain migration again?
Chain migration is when an immigrant gets legal status, but because of the system can petition to bring in legally brothers, extended family, and parents. The idea is to allow for family reunification, but only allow people to bring in their immediate family, children under age and spouses.
Okay, well, thank you so much more to dissect, but we'll look forward to having you on again. Alfonso Aguilar, thank you so much. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un tells the U.S. he has a button for nuclear weapons on his desk. In his New Year's address on Korean TV, the leader adds that those missiles can reach the mainland United States. But he says his own country is, quote, a responsible nuclear nation that loves peace. And a leading Muslim cleric condemns ISIS's recent attack on a Coptic Christian church. Last month's attack in Egypt killed 9 and injured 10. Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, offers condolences to the victims' families. He also says the strikes undermine Egypt's unity. Al-Tayyib adds that the best response to terrorism is increased love and unity between Muslims and Christians. At least 12 are dead after weekend protests in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Catholic and opposition groups defied a ban on demonstrations against President Joseph Kabila. Police responded by firing tear gas into churches. More than 120 people were arrested, including a dozen altar boys leading a march. A small plane crashes in Costa Rica, killing 12, including 10 Americans. Heavy winds hit the area. The single-engine plane went down into its flight only 10 minutes. Ireland is set this year to vote on abortion. The country's Minister of Health says the referendum will be in late May or June. Simon Harris denies a report saying the vote had been moved to October. Abortion currently is against the law in Ireland, except to save the life of the mother. A panel voted last month voted in favor of making abortion legal up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. And Pope Francis celebrates the new year wishing all good things to everyone this year.
Sulla soglia del 2018 rivolgo a tutti.
The Holy Father, with a busy Christmas season, began 2018 celebrating Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. Not only was it the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God, January 1st also marks World Day for Peace. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Thanks for being with us, Ed. First, the Holy Father's message for yesterday's World Day of Peace focused on refugees and migrants. How exactly did he raise those issues?
Well, he put them in the context of peace, Jason. He talked about, he stressed the hardships and sufferings that refugees and migrants face. But he also said that we mustn't exhaust their hopes for peace. And he also gave in his message what he called 4 mileposts for action, which were to welcome refugees, to help integrate them, to protect them, and to promote their well-being.
And I know also the Church starts the new year honoring the Virgin Mary. What did the Pope say about her?
Well, he asked the faithful really to try and imitate Mary by giving over to God all of our hopes and sorrows and excess baggage. In that excess baggage, he included the banality of consumerism, as he put it, empty words, loud shouting, and he said that only through Mary do we discover what really matters. And he said that every Christian really should have a devotion to Our Lady.
And on Sunday evening, the Pope marked the end of 2017 at St. Peter's Basilica with that beautiful prayer, the Te Deum. What was his message during that ceremony?
Well, as always, he asks for forgiveness for the sins of the past year. He spoke about the lies and injustices that have been committed over the past year, and he said God's love shouldn't be wasted on those. But he also used the Te Deum, which is a prayer of thanksgiving, to give thanks really to the people of Rome, who do a lot of good here to keep the city running, those involved in the services here and in education.
And when the Pope was referring to lies and deceit, what exactly was he referring to there?
He didn't explain more about that. He just said that, and he spoke about really not wasting God's love, as it were, that he gives us every year on those kind of things.
Okay, well, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Jason.
And coming up later in the show, we'll talk to EWTN senior contributor Matthew Bunson about Pope Francis's 2018 schedule. And another big milestone for Pope Francis on Twitter. The Holy Father's English @Pontifex account passes 16 million followers. Pope Benedict XVI launched it 5 years ago. With tweets in many different languages, the Holy Father is one of the most followed world leaders. Coming up, abortion fight. A pro-life group goes to court to try to stop publicly funded abortions in Illinois. And the verdict is in. We discuss President Trump's first-year judicial nominees and what they mean for Catholics. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. An Illinois judge dismisses a lawsuit that would have temporarily stopped taxpayer funding for abortion in Illinois. The judge says the judiciary should not intervene in political questions, but a pro-life group says it will file another lawsuit. Publicly funded abortions became legal in Illinois Monday. The federal judicial branch will look into how it handles sexual harassment allegations in its own ranks. Chief Justice John Roberts made the announcement Sunday in his annual State of the Judiciary report. The move comes after a federal judge in San Francisco retired following allegations of sexual misconduct. And judicial nominations are one big way President Trump can shape the country. The president had 1 Supreme Court and 12 U.S. Court of Appeals confirmations, more than his immediate predecessors in their first years. President Obama had 1 Supreme Court and 3 U.S. Court of Appeals confirmations. President Bush had only 6 U.S. Court of Appeals confirmations. We're joined now by Matt Smith, president of Catholic Advocate, a nonpartisan organization working to ensure Catholic voices are heard in the federal government. Welcome back and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So why should Catholics be concerned about these appeal court nominations?
Well, it's the first step before something gets to the Supreme Court. It's a place where rulings can stop before needing to come to the Supreme Court. Lots of cases being decided, religious liberty cases, abortion cases, like we just talked about with Illinois. That could be something that heads to the appeals courts pretty quickly.
So the president has beat the record with these appeals court nominations. what are the issues? You had mentioned abortion, religious liberty. I mean, how can an appeals court judge have a say on those issues?
Well, the important thing to think about is at the end of the Obama administration, 9 of the 13 appellate courts were controlled by Democrat appointees. And when you talk about the appellate courts, there's multiple judges that then come down on a ruling. Similar to the Supreme Court, there are 9, and there are the rulings 7-2, 6-3, 5-4. Same thing on the appellate courts. So when you have a majority of Democrat appointments making these rulings, there tends to be a tilt, and finding that balance with the Republican appointees is important if we're going to defend some of these values that are of concerns to Catholics.
And one of the things that's always interesting with these appointments, they're always for life. I mean, the Senate, they're there for 6 years. Representatives have a 2-year term, president 4 years. This is a for-life appointment.
It is, but there's also something called senior status, which when you combine the amount of service plus their age, you have judges that can take senior status where they can still hear cases, but it also opens up the opportunity for a vacancy for President Trump to appoint. And that's where the real opportunity lies for President Trump, is any of these judges that were Republican appointees that might be approaching senior status, they can still hear cases, but when they take that status, it opens up a vacancy that he can then appoint. And if there's any sort of risk of the Senate flipping next year or making confirmations that much harder, there's an opportunity where he could really have an impact on shaping the courts in his presidency.
And then shaping the courts in the presidency, one of those main issues is the pro-life cause. I mean, what can happen in this term, in his presidency, his first year in office here, his first couple years in office, making these appointments? I mean, what's the long-term strategy for abortion laws?
Well, I mean, you have lots of places where we've had to chip away, whether it's the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, the Pain Capable legislation, all these various things that immediately they get passed by a pro-life Congress, they get challenged in the courts. So if we're going to continue to make the inroads on the legislative front and rolling back the damage that Roe versus Wade did over 45 years ago, then we have to have the backstop of appointees that will uphold the law.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Matt Smith, president of Catholic Advocate. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it very much. And a former Miss America winner is heading back to the organization as chair of the board of directors. Gretchen Carlson, the pageant's 1989 winner, takes over the role effective immediately. The move comes after several officials resigned following a report that they exchanged offensive emails about former contestants. And a brain cancer victim who dedicated his last years to fighting assisted suicide has died. This fall, we spoke with J.J. Hansen and his wife, Kristen. They were sharing their story at the Capitol.
Every day is a gift. Our son Lucas is a gift. This whole experience has taught us to live in the present moment and be thankful for today. And that's all any of us can do, one day at a time.
There's still difficulties, there's challenges, but when you just give up and you look at some of the other law problems with assisted suicide, this could be dangerous for problems like us.
J.J. Hansen leaves behind his wife, Kristen, and their 2 young sons, James and Lucas. The retired Marine was 36 years old. Up next, on schedule, the Pope has a busy 2018 ahead of him. We discuss the highlights of his travel plans. And Hail Mary, full of grace, a look at the ways Mary's depicted at the Vatican. The church today honors 2 friends and doctors of the church. Saints Basil the Great and Gregory Nazianzen lived in the 4th century in modern-day Turkey. Both were bishops and theologians. Glad to have you join us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. As we told you earlier, Pope Francis recently broke 16 million followers on his English Twitter account. He's not just popular on social media. His Mass in Bogota in September drew more than 1 million people despite rain and heavy fog. As we enter 2018, it's time to ask, where is Pope Francis headed in this new year? We're joined by Dr. Matthew Bunson, an EWTN senior contributor, and His Holiness recently turned 81. We know he has trips to Chile, right, this year? Where else might he be?
Just in the next couple of weeks, he's going to Chile and Peru. 6th trip to Latin America, so obviously this is a priority for him. We are hearing stories that he may be going to the Baltics, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, as well as possibly India, possibly Africa. But the one to circle on our calendars is at the end of August when he goes to Ireland for the World Meeting of Families, similar as he did to Philadelphia in 2015. That's significant. He's the first pope to go there since 1979, and Pope St. John Paul II. And, of course, the Irish Church has been battered by the sex abuse crisis.
Crisis of faith there in Ireland right now. I mean, what do these countries, including Ireland, what do they reveal about his priorities?
Well, they tell us that the Pope is, as always, talking about the peripheries. He's trying to go to places where the church is being persecuted. We saw that in Myanmar. We've seen that in Bangladesh. But he's also concerned about bolstering the faith where it's growing the fastest or is a really strong bastion. His focus on Latin America, for example, where I think about a quarter of the world's Catholic population resides, going to Africa, where the Catholic population is growing the fastest in the world.
And going to a place like Ireland, where he's going to be talking about the family, but also that country, as you mentioned, rocked by the scandals as well as a crisis of faith.
And as you reported earlier in this show tonight, there's a referendum on abortion coming up. Pope Francis, I think, is going to have a lot to say about that.
Well, we'll see what he says there. Now, let's talk about cardinals. This is how he can set priorities moving forward as well. There's 216 cardinals right now, currently?
Right now, exactly 120 electors, which is sort of the number that we always need to be focused on. By June, that number will be reduced by about 6.
Okay.
So Francis is using these consistories sort of to fill up, to keep that number at 120, which is the limit that was set by Pope Paul VI. It's significant because we have no idea where exactly he's going to be choosing his cardinals. Based on precedent, he's choosing them from the most distant places imaginable. I would not be surprised, however, if in that batch he chooses the new Archbishop of Paris, because he is one of Francis's picks, and he's one of the great bioethicists in Europe today.
What about any Americans that might be picked moving forward?
Well, there's Archbishop Jose Gomez, certainly, who's somebody that's considered definitely should be receiving a red hat, as well as Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia.
The Synod of the Bishops will be meeting again this fall to talk about the youth. What issues should we be looking for there?
Francis will wrap up in Ireland, and barely a month and a half later, he will open the Synod of Bishops on the family and children. This is a synod that's going to be focusing on vocation for youth. This is one of those priorities for Francis. He's seeing the results of secularism, of the throwaway culture on millennials. We're going to have an idea of a lot of the tone, some of the tenor of the Synod of Bishops in March when he meets with young people in Rome. And then also look for some of these preparatory documents that come out from the Synod of Bishops. That'll tell us a lot leading up to October what Francis wants to accomplish with this synod.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Matthew Bunson, senior contributor for EWTN. Thank you so much.
Privileged to be with you. Happy New Year.
Appreciate it very much. And as we mentioned earlier, yesterday was the Solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God. And any visit to the Vatican will include the chance to see lots of artwork dedicated to the Madonna. Correspondent Juliet Lindley walks us through some of the most compelling images.
Rome, heart of the Catholic Church and home to St. Peter's Basilica. Much like a mother embraces her child, the great colonnade designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini embraces everyone who enters the square. And as we step inside, we find one of the most famous renditions of Mary in all of art history. Michelangelo's marble sculpture of the Pietà shows Mary overwhelmed by grief as she cradles her lifeless son.
Michelangelo venne avvisato.
Cardinal Angelo Comastri, who is in charge of the basilica, tells us the Renaissance master made Mary look younger than her son on purpose because she was without sin and pure of heart. That holy purity can be seen in the ancient fresco known as the Madonna of the Column, originally housed in the old basilica built in the 4th century. After Vatican II, Paul VI renamed it Mater Ecclesiae, or Mother of the Church in Latin.
Ebbene, Paolo VI ha voluto legare il titolo Mater Ecclesiae.
The Cardinal says he chose the title to send the message that devotion to the Blessed Mother is an essential part of Christianity. Outside the basilica, a mosaic version of the same painting looks down from the Apostolic Palace, a sign of heavenly protection on all who come here.
It was Pope St. John Paul II who asked for the Marian image to be placed here, soon after the assassination attempt on May 13, 1981. The pontiff was personally convinced Our Lady saved him, and he realized that day that something was missing from the square, an image of the Virgin Mary. At the Vatican, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Our own beautiful pilgrimage with Juliet Lindley. Thank you so much. And we thank you for watching us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi, and we leave you tonight with more images from Sunday as the Holy Father celebrated the end of 2017. Good night and God bless.